pleasure today to be interviewing Katie Couric here at her office in New York City.
Well, it's nice to have you.
Well, thank you. So we are going to start right from the beginning, as you were warned. What was your name at birth?
Catherine Ann Couric, the same one I have today. My parents thought about naming me Gay after a great uncle Gaylord of mine, and also Charlotte after my dad's sister. But I wonder what sort of turn my career would take if I had to say every night, "Hi, good evening, I'm Gay Couric." So I love the name Gay, but of course it's taken on a whole new meaning. And I was born as Catherine Ann Couric and have been ever since.
What were you called as a kid? Was it Katie or Catherine? Or?
Katie. All my life I've been called Katie, although I've had a series of identity crises about my name. When I first started covering the Pentagon as a deputy correspondent for NBC News in the late 80s, I felt Katie Couric was a little too. So I started using Catherine Couric. And I think my friends thought that was pretty humorous, but I thought it gave me a little more gravitas, if you will, which I always say is testicles in Latin. But so I used Catherine for a while, but when I got my job at the Today Show, I reverted to Katie because the truth of the matter is I'm just more of a Katie than Catherine, although I love the name Catherine.
Did you feel yourself acting differently as a Catherine than a Katie?
I mean, maybe a little bit. I think part of it was the job more than the name change. I was covering the Pentagon and the invasion of Panama, the explosion aboard the USS Iowa. These were very serious stories. And so I think probably Catherine was in keeping with the content of the stories I was covering at the time.
When were you born?
I was born on January 7th, 1957 in Washington, D.C.
Is that where you grew up?
I grew up in Arlington, Virginia, right outside Washington, a suburb of Washington, on a street called 40th Street in a very Leave It to Beaver neighborhood. Lots of kids, lots of crabapple fights, lots of baseball games in the street, lots of capture the flag and snake in the grass and red light, green light and Mother May I. I really grew up, I think, in an idyllic setting. Very wholesome, all-American neighborhood, and I had a really wonderfully happy childhood.
What kind of kid were you?
I was pretty precocious. I was always extremely outgoing. I don't think I have a shy bone in my body. And so I remember when I was little, I had 2 older sisters and an older brother. I was the youngest of 4 children. And I used to go through my sister's yearbook and stare at the pictures and then go to the football games. And I was in elementary school, and I would turn to someone and say, "You're Barbara McLaughlin, aren't you?" And they would be like, "How do you know?" And I would say, "I saw your photograph in my sister's yearbook." So I was very, very outgoing, kind of, had no bones about talking to everyone, super friendly, super happy. My sister's friends used to call me Smiley. And I was quite a tomboy early on. I played Army a lot, played sports. I was an extremely fast runner. When I was in 4th grade, the gym teacher at my elementary school, Mr. Hamill, used to pull me out to race against the 6th grade boys because I was a very fast sprinter. It all kind of went downhill when I reached puberty, but there was a bright and shiny moment in time where I kicked all the boys' butts in running.
Well, tell me a little about your parents, their names and what they did.
My mom's name is Eleanor Couric, and my father's name is John Couric. My dad was a newspaper man early in his career. He wrote for the Macon Telegraph in Macon, Georgia, and then he was a political reporter for the Atlanta Constitution. He later became a writer and then an editor for United Press and moved to Washington with his family before I was born, and then went into public relations and worked for the National Association of Broadcasters for a while, and then worked for a number of organizations after that in PR. But I always thought my dad's real forte and first love was journalism. he's a real Renaissance man, and I think my dad can talk fluently about almost any subject, from 18th century literature to an event during World War I. He is extremely intelligent and very well read. I think it was hard for him to support a family of 4 kids, quite frankly, on a newspaper or wire service salary, and that's why he went into public relations. But he's not really the hail fellow, well-met kind of backslapping guy. He's not super schmoozy, although he's very, very charming and lovely. But I think if he had his druthers, he'd be writing and reporting and editing, because I think he's a real journalist.
What traits do you think you inherited from your parents?
My mom was a pretty traditional housewife. I always thought if she had been born in a different era, she would probably be a financial whiz on Wall Street, or a very accomplished woman professionally. She's quite clever, she's artistic. When the AIDS crisis surfaced in the early 1980s, my mom bought Trojan stock, which I thought was pretty smart of her. She worked at Lord & Taylor for a while, and she also volunteered at Planned Parenthood. And, but we were really her first priority, and she was a wonderful mother and still is. I think that from my mom, my parents both have, I think, a good sense of humor. I think they are very smart. I hope I've inherited some of their intelligence. They're very honorable people, and I think of my dad especially as a person of tremendous integrity, very caring, very loving in an unconditional way, very interested in the world around them, very interested in education, and emphasize that a great deal for all of us growing up. And I hope that I share many of those qualities.
And what about the journalism aspect?
I think I get my ability to write well and quickly from my dad, because from an early age I love to write. I remember when my essay was read in front of the class in 8th grade, and I was so proud, and my dad would read my writing and say, you're a really strong writer. So that's something that I've always been able to do easily and with a lot of joy. For some people, I think writing is such a chore. For me, it is really fun and exciting. I love words. When we were little, my parents used to ask us to bring a new word to the dinner table every day. And that was a really wonderful exercise, because I think it taught me to love language even more than I already did. And it also helped expand my vocabulary. And incongruous was a word I brought one day, and my sisters and brother would bring words, and my mom and dad as well. And, I think that really sort of inspired us to love words, love writing, and love language.
What about current events? Was that something that also was around?
We talked about current events, but I don't think it was really like the Kennedys' dinner table where they would have big policy debates. I would like to say, we discussed LBJ's Great Society at length and the pros and cons of the Civil Rights Bill. But truth be told, it was more sort of pedestrian than that. We talked a lot about our lives and our days, and we did talk about, things that were going on in the world to a certain extent, but not in a way that, dominated the discussion every night. My sister was 10 years older, so we had a big age span. So when she was 16, for example, I was 6 years old. So I think we weren't close enough in age, I think, to be kind of at the same place intellectually to have a big policy conversation. But we certainly talked about issues, and but we did pretty much talk about school and what we were studying and what my dad was doing. And I don't have memories of, as I said, big policy debates around the dinner table.
Did you watch a lot of TV as a kid?
I did. I loved TV. I wasn't allowed to watch it that much, but I remember coming home with my brother, who's 3 years older than I am, and watching Gilligan's Island. And I used to love Bewitched. I remember that was on Wednesday nights at 8:30, I think. So it was a big deal to be able to watch that show and stay up that late. I watched I Love Lucy, of course, mostly reruns at that point in time because we're talking about the late 60s or even mid 60s. What other shows? I mean, loved, and still do Andy Griffith. I mean, my heart melts when I see Opie and Aunt Bee, and I think those shows actually taught me a lot, shows like Andy Griffith, and because they were very, I think, instructional in terms of life lessons they imparted. And so I really did love that show. I'm trying to think of the other shows that were kind of part of my upbringing. I was really into Mod Squad when that came out in the 70s. I wanted to be Peggy Lipton. Mannix, I used to love Mannix. I don't know why. I mean, there's a whole slew of them. We didn't spend endless hours in front of the television, but, you know, I did enjoy watching shows. We watched the news. We didn't gather around the dinner table as a family and watch Walter Cronkite. I want to say that too, but I just can't be dishonest about it. We listened to the radio news a lot in the morning at the breakfast table because we didn't have a TV at the breakfast table in our kitchen. And I remember vividly watching 60 Minutes from an early age. I mean, early being probably junior high, on Sunday night, sitting on the floor in my parents' bedroom and eating leftover fried chicken and watching 60 Minutes and really being quite captivated by that show. So there were a lot of things that we enjoyed watching, and I remember more watching them with my brother or watching them by myself. Maybe we didn't watch that many shows as a family. I'm making us sound very dysfunctional in retrospect, but I remember watching The Wonderful World of Disney when I was very little on a Sunday night. I vividly remember, probably because I have photographs of my brother Johnny and I watching Peter Pan with Mary Martin and Cyril Richard, and I just absolutely love the TV production. It looks incredibly anachronistic now when you watch it, but I love the music from it. It was, who did the music? I know they're very famous.
The Brothers Sherman.
No, it was the woman, Betty. Okay, the music was by Betty Comden and Adolph Green, and I later played it on the piano. I got the piano music, and I love the music from that Peter Pan much more than the Walt Disney version, with all due respect. So I remember watching that with my brother. TV was definitely a part of my upbringing, and I really enjoyed watching a lot of different shows. I remember Password and What's My Line, and Gene Rayburn doing the Match Game. So I think I must have watched a lot more television than, now that I think of it, than perhaps I care to admit.
Did you have any idea what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Well, I went through various phases like most kids. For a time, I wanted to be a model, as if. For a time, I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to be a singer, and all those things were problematic because I didn't really have what it took to do well in any of those fields. I did think that I wanted to do something creative, something that involved writing, something that put me in contact with people. And I think as I was going through high school and college, the idea of being a journalist was sort of in the back of my mind, but it didn't really come to fruition, that ambition, until I was in college. And I was writing for my college newspaper and really enjoyed it, enjoyed interviewing people, doing personality profiles. Was mostly a feature writer and did some news writing as well. And then when I graduated from college, I started pursuing a career in television news. I thought about being a print journalist because I love to write so much, and I thought there's something wonderfully independent about being a print journalist. And I had worked at radio stations in Washington every summer during my college years. And I thought radio would be fun too. But I was fairly mercenary about it. I thought TV news is more lucrative. It's a little more of the moment and of the future, I thought. And if my face didn't stop a clock, I thought I might as well give it a try. So that's when I started pursuing television news. For a time, I was very interested in advertising because I thought it would be really fun to work in the creative end of advertising, to come up with images and slogans and jingles, because I'm semi-musical, and I thought that would be a lot of fun. But I tried to get a job at various advertising agencies when I graduated from college, and they basically all said, don't call us, we'll call you. Others encouraged me to go to business school and get an MBA. And since I'm not really that adept at even balancing my checkbook, I thought that probably wasn't a good idea.
Where did you go to college?
I went to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, which is a wonderful school, and I majored in English and history, American studies. And I just loved it there. It wasn't my first choice. My sisters had both gone to Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, one of the 7 sisters, and both had done phenomenally well there. Phi Beta Kappa, blah, blah, blah. And I got flat out rejected. And it was between Vanderbilt and the University of Virginia for me. And since we were in state, I knew that I'd save my parents a lot of money by going to the University of Virginia. It's also a wonderful school, as is Vanderbilt, but I thought, Virginia would be a great choice for me. My older brother Johnny went there and would be there if I went as a senior, 4th year, if I was there as a first-year student. So I ended up going to UVA.
So you mentioned that you tried to get into advertising, and then what was your first real job after getting out of college?
My first job out of college was working as a desk assistant for ABC News in Washington. So basically what I did was make coffee, Xerox, distribute newspapers, fetch ham sandwiches for Frank Reynolds, and whatever anyone wanted me to do. I was pretty much a paid gopher, and it was a great experience because it was my first exposure to television news. So I was at a pretty high level place and was able to watch Sam Donaldson at work and Bettina Gregory and a lot of different correspondents and producers. My first day on the job, I was sitting there, and of course I was terrified and 22 years old, and gosh, I might have even been wearing one of those really ridiculous shirts with a bow tie that career gals wore back in the late 1970s. And Sam Donaldson walked into the newsroom, which was very open. All the senior producers are out in the newsroom working in sort of a horseshoe formation of desks. And he said, "What is your name, young lady?" And I said, "It's Katie Couric." So he jumped on the desk, started dancing and jumping around the desk, as only Sam Donaldson would or could, and began to sing Katie, Beautiful Katie at the top of his lungs in the middle of the newsroom. So I thought, wow, this TV news business is going to be very interesting.
What was your response to that?
I was mortified and yet delighted at the same time because, as I said, I'm not exactly shy, and I do sometimes enjoy being the center of attention. So to have him greet me in this fashion, and then he whisked me away and said, "Come with me." And he took me to a White House news conference, a White House briefing. And that was quite an experience. And I now realize, of course, in retrospect, he was doing something extraordinarily nice for a terrified 22-year-old who was, experiencing her first day in the workforce.
Wow. So your first day, you were at a White House news conference?
Yeah.
Do you remember what the
I don't.
topic was?
The one thing I wish I had done throughout my career is kept a journal. because I've had so many crazy, wonderful, horrible experiences. I wish I had kept a diary or even talked into a tape recorder and said, "Dear diary, today I went to the White House and to a briefing there." So I don't really remember what they were talking about, but it was a fun, exhilarating day.
How long were you at ABC News?
I was at ABC for about a year when a fledgling cable operation was starting called the Cable News Network. It was derided at the time as Chicken Noodle News by established network people. But I heard about it, and George Watson, who was the bureau chief of ABC News in Washington, was going over there to help Ted Turner start this operation. And as much as I liked ABC, I noticed that most of the women there were in very sort of subservient positions: production associates, secretaries, a few unit managers, but not many in high-ranking positions. There were female correspondents like Cassie Mackin and Bettina Gregory, but I didn't see a lot of potential for moving up the ladder. And I just wondered how many opportunities there would be for women there. So I thought it would be great to be on the ground floor of a news network. So I decided I was going to go over there and try my hand at a lot of different things because it wasn't a union shop. So I told Carl Bernstein, who at the time was the Washington bureau chief for ABC. He had been brought in after his experiences at the Washington Post and his stellar career there. And I said, I'm going to make a move. I'm going to go to CNN and try to work there. And he said, well, why would you go to the minor leagues when you're already in the major leagues? And I remember saying, that's true, Mr. Bernstein, but I think I need to learn how to play baseball first. And I thought, wow, that was pretty ballsy for a 23-year-old kid. And it was one of those things that you usually think of 30 minutes later, but just right then and there, I said, yes, Mr. Bernstein. So he said, oh, well, actually that makes sense. So at CNN, I was able to do so many different things. I was an assistant assignment editor. I went out on stories. And then I moved to Atlanta to be an associate producer for a show called Take Two, which was a 2-hour noon to 2 show with Don Farmer and Chris Curl. I had met Don at ABC because he worked for 2020, and I used to bring him story ideas. And Chris, of course, was a very well-known and beautiful local anchor for the ABC affiliate in Washington. So they had come to CNN, and they needed someone as an associate producer. So I went down there and was able to do a lot of things. They gave me so many opportunities. I started doing reporting and really just started working on my craft, if you will, in a place where I had a mentor, Don and Chris, or 2 mentors, and endless opportunities to do pieces. I went and interviewed George Wallace. I did a piece on, on Reading, Pennsylvania, where they have all the outlets, and I did a lot of political reporting. I got to go to some conventions, and so it was a really, really wonderful experience. But I wanted to be a full-time reporter.
Now, was this your first time on camera at CNN?
Yes. Oh, no. When I was in Washington at CNN, before I moved to Atlanta, Stuart Laurie, who was the Washington bureau chief of CNN, said, I want to give you a shot. I'd love you to try to go to the White House in the morning and do a live report and just tell us what the president is doing that day. So I couldn't believe it. It was my big break. And I was terrified. I went home, I practiced, figured out what I was going to wear, this blue striped pantsuit, and got all ready to go. And I went to the White House the next morning after preparing all night for this. And I remember seeing the anchors. Actually, I didn't see them. I heard them in my IFB. And Dave Walker and Lois Hart, they were a husband and wife anchor team at CNN. And I heard one of them say to the other, "Who is that girl? She looks like she's about 16 years old." And this was during the commercial break right before I went on. So they threw to me Katie Couric, maybe Catherine, I can't remember who I was at that moment in time. And I started saying, "Today the president is meeting with his national security advisors, the big new Brzezinski." And I was so bad. I was so sing-songy. I wasn't authoritative at all. I probably just kind of read what he was doing, and in no way that was suitable for a real presentation on a newscast. And I was pretty bad. So I think that's when I went back to the Washington Bureau of CNN, and the assignment editor, Bill Hensel, told me that Reese Schoenfeld had called. He was the president of CNN, to say he never wanted me on the air again.
Oh, he actually told you that?
He told Bill Hensel, and Bill Hensel told me. And I was like, wow, I guess that didn't go well.
Now, was it your aspiration to be on camera, to be an on-camera reporter? Was that really what you wanted to do at that point? Or?
I think I did, because I felt like I liked to write, I liked to report, I liked to interact with people. And if I was doing all that, I didn't really want to produce it for someone else. If I had the remotest chance of being a good on-air, on-camera reporter, I thought I might as well give it a try.
So how long did it take from that first disastrous appearance
Yes.
to getting back on? Was it for CNN?
I always call it was like my own personal Stephen King novel, my debut on CNN, because I was so bad and everybody thought so. And when the president of CNN, Reese Schoenfeld, said he never wanted to see me on the air again, I was devastated. I thought, wow, I just blew my big break. But then I thought, I'm going to keep trying. And I remember seeing a coffee cup on a desk at CNN with one of those little funny, I think is it Sandra Boynton characters, and it said, "Don't let the turkeys get you down." And I thought, I'm not going to. And I kept working really hard and reporting. And then when I went down to Atlanta and worked for Don Farmer and Chris Curl, they gave me opportunities. And it's what Malcolm Gladwell says: to be good at anything, it requires, 10,000 hours of practice. And I just wasn't experienced enough. I wasn't old enough. I didn't really know what I was doing. And I don't think it's something you instantaneously become. That's why people go to very small markets and work their way up and make the mistakes early on, so they won't on a bigger stage. And I think CNN was a pretty big stage for me to have my TV news debut.
Does that footage still exist?
I think so. Yeah. I don't know, though. I don't know whether it's in the CNN archives. I don't know what they do with all that stuff, because they have a lot of tape there, So I continued to work really hard in Atlanta, and but I wanted to be a full-time reporter. I was really producing and reporting on the side. So I tried to do that, and Ed Turner, who was the vice president of CNN, told me that if I wanted to report, CNN wasn't the place for me. He clearly didn't really like my work, didn't think I had it, and suggested I go back into the writer's pool, which was kind of a slap in the face. So serendipitously, about that time, Al Buck, who was the news director of WTBJ in Miami, had seen me on CNN and called and offered me a job as a local reporter in Miami. And I thought, boy, if I want experience, if I want to be reporting on all kinds of situations day in and day out, if I really want to learn how to do a live shot, which terrified me, I should go be a local news reporter where I can focus on it full time, 24/7, and so that's what I did.
What do you think he saw in you?
Hopefully I think he saw potential. I think he saw that I could project. I think he liked my writing. I think he liked the way I appeared on television, because it is a visual medium. And I think he saw some kind of raw talent that he thought he could help develop. And I'm so glad he did, because it was perfect timing. and a lot of doors were being closed in my face, even though I had worked so hard. But I needed, I think, a smaller venue and a more constant diet of reporting to really get good.
And what kind of advice were you given when you started here? You have a local market that you weren't that familiar with. I mean, how did you make your way into that environment?
You know, I think when you're young, you're just fearless and you're hungry. And so I think it would have been terribly intimidating to go to someplace like New York City. But Miami was pretty manageable. And obviously, I wasn't covering local politics. I didn't have any sources. So I was a general assignment reporter covering drug busts and murders, unfortunately, because there was a lot of crime in Miami in the early 80s. And this was actually about 1985 to 1987. I did just all kinds of different stories, and I loved the city. It was so interesting and so colorful and culturally diverse. I would cover stories about Haitian immigrants and, of course, the Hispanic population, the Cuban Americans who lived in Miami, and Calle Ocho and all the great things. I started dating a policeman, and, it was really, really fun. And I just got invaluable experience. When I was a local reporter in Miami, though, I decided, when I was a local reporter in Miami, I decided I'd love to be an anchor, or at least try anchoring. It wasn't that I necessarily had aspirations to be an anchor, but I thought the more skills I had, the more marketable I would be. So they agreed to let me anchor. And I don't know, I guess all my debuts have been pretty bad. Maybe even the most recent. But I ran up the stairs because the newsroom and the studio were on two different floors, actually in two different buildings at WTBJ. And I must have been getting ready for the newscast, and I ran up the stairs and I hyperventilated and I couldn't talk. And it was so bad, so bad. And I think that was actually when I was doing a report for the noon newscast. So that was horrific. And then I think when I anchored, I just was uncomfortable. I really hadn't done it. I had no idea what I was doing. I hadn't really practiced. So that was pretty bad as well. But I think Miami was a fantastic experience for me. I loved living there. I made a lot of friends. And I think my reporting improved by leaps and bounds.
Did you start to become a local celebrity as well?
Not really. I mean, I was this young, scrappy street reporter. Although I'll never forget the first time someone recognized me. I was buying a card at Burdines, which is a department store. I was buying a birthday card or something, and the sales lady said, "Dear, you look just like that girl on television." And I said, "Oh, I am that girl on television." I couldn't believe it. Someone actually recognized me. And she said, "Well, I have to be honest with you. Your skin looks much better in person." That was my first experience with appreciating the remarkably rude things that people say to you when you're on television. They don't mean it, but they're completely, what's the word when you don't realize when you're like
oblivious?
Thank you. They're completely oblivious to the fact that they've just said something tremendously insulting. But, I wasn't quite sure whether I should be insulted or really excited that she recognized me. I didn't know whether I should be excited that she recognized me or insulted because she was talking about my skin.
It's so funny, at every point in your story, there are things that most people would say, "Oh my gosh, I'm getting out of this business."
Yeah.
But you just, what is it about you that kept you on the track?
I think I'm very persistent and I'm very resilient. I think I'm very persistent and I'm very resilient. I think I have this quality in me that looks around and says, who the hell do these people think they are? I'm just as good. And I think every time that someone's tried to push me down, it's just made me say, you know, I'm not going to take that. I'm going to prove them wrong. And there are many moments in my career. In fact, I look back and wonder, gee, how did I hang in there? Why did I keep doing this? Am I glutton for punishment? Is this some kind of weird psychological thing I have going? But, you know, I think a lot of people actually probably had to work their way up. And, you know, I think everyone has obstacles and naysayers. But it just made me want to improve and get better. And in hindsight, that was such a gift, because when I was given opportunities, I had worked so hard and had gained so much experience. I was actually ready for those positions. So in a weird way, it actually served me very, very well to have people kind of say, you're not that good, because it made me want to prove them wrong. And in the process, I got a lot better.